And you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
A couple of moments from President Trump's time in office so far. Moments our next guest says has forever altered the presidency. David Leonhardt joins us now. He's an op-ed columnist for the New York Times. His latest column is entitled Donald Trump versus the United States of America. David calls it, quote, just the facts in 40 sentences. Also with us, senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, David Drucker. He's also a contributing writer at Vanity Fair. He's got a new piece for the magazine entitled Boom or Bust, How Republicans Are Surviving Life in the Trump Vortex. Gentlemen, good to have you both on. David, let me start with your piece, and we can talk about this through the David Leonhardt, we have two Davids, through the prism of this Ukraine story that we have in front of us. There are a series of facts, as reported by your newspaper and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, that lead some people to conclusions, although we don't have them all definitively linked. What does this story tell you, and how does it fit into the puzzle you've sort of put together in your piece?
Well, it really does fit in this pattern, even if we restrict ourselves just to what the president and what his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, have publicly acknowledged, right? Even if we sort of leave it there. There's this pattern in which he undermines the United States on the world stage, right? You played the clip of him undermining U.S. intelligence agencies while standing next to Putin. He cozies up to foreign dictators. He pushes away our allies. He hired a national security advisor who he knew had secretly been working for Turkey. And so there's this pattern in which he undermines the U.S. on the world stage. He breaks the law, whether it's the hush money to cover up extramarital affairs. He shows no respect, whether it's calling Barbara Bush nasty while he calls white supremacists some very fine people. And there just has never been a president in our lifetimes, and probably ever, of either party who has treated the office and the country with such disrespect. And so what I tried to do was, in my column this week, just list 40 sentences without a lot of judgments or opinions, and just put the facts out there and say, look, this is what he has done as president. This is who he is. And the question is, what are we going to do about it?
And as you point out in the piece, David, most of it is out in the open. It's on a TV interview or a press conference, or yesterday, even in front of at the UN, the President of the United States doing things that are, in fact, unprecedented, which is a word that's thrown around pretty casually, but often it's true.
Yeah, I mean, at the New York Times, if you put unprecedented in a story, you have to go through this whole process to get it approved,
sure,
right? And so, but many of these things are. And I deliberately left out matters of policy. I disagree with him on climate change. I disagree with him on tax policy. But this isn't about that. This is about the way he treats other human beings, the way he treats the office, the way he treats the country. And actually, many of his sort of worst bits of personal behavior, whether it's his repeated denigration of John McCain or how he treats the Bush family, are actually aimed at Republicans rather than Democrats.
You know, David Drucker, what I love about your piece in Vanity Fair so much is you actually write in the piece, you have quotes in the piece that usually Republican members or advisors will say off the record, rarely gets into any pieces. But you have a quote here that sounds so much like what I've heard from people off the record for years. This from a veteran Republican strategist. Do I think Trump is a horrible person? Yes. But that's so beyond the point. As a Republican, I hate him because he's making us lose when we should be crushing it. It's his stupid personality. If he were slightly less terrible, we would be winning. The Democrats are nuts. They are going to fundamentally ruin this country, all because some guy can't control his 2-year-old tantrums. This is what I hate about the guy.
Yeah, Joe, in talking to Republicans really over the past 4 years, but especially since the president was inaugurated, there's such a complicated relationship they have with him because, on the one hand, aside from all of the power politics that we focus on so often, so many Republicans are in Washington and are in politics generally because they're pretty conservative, really unlike the president, and they care a lot about a lot of these policy goals. And what they're dealing with here is somebody who will give them just enough to keep hanging on and then keep reminding them why they don't like him. And yet, when they consider not necessarily supporting a Democrat, but sitting on their hands, letting things shake out so that the party can rebuild in a more, let's say, normal conservative direction, if there's a market for that, they're listening to a lot of the progressive Democrats who do want to fundamentally change the country, and they're very open about that, whether it's healthcare policy or national security policy. And they're thinking to themselves, this is not something that I can abide by. It's not what I signed up for. So it may sound strange to Democrats who look at Trump's behavior and everything else and wonder how anybody can stick by him. But I think it's a matter of Republicans looking at Democrats being dangerous in one way versus people who look at Trump being dangerous in another way. And it really messes with their head, but it makes this a very confusing issue for them.
Yeah, I hear it every day from rank-and-file Republicans who say they loathe Donald Trump, but they actually fear Democrats more. One Republican presidential advisor from the past told me, if you give Republicans a chance to vote for a sociopath or a socialist, they and independents will vote for the sociopath every time.
And by the way, Joe, so many Republicans were thinking in 2020 of sitting on their hands, big donors, other operatives, and they're looking at Elizabeth Warren, great candidate, very progressive, and they're thinking to themselves, I'll take Trump over her. I can't believe I'm going to have to help this guy because she would be worse than him. And this is something that is really to the president's benefit after he didn't have this kind of help in 2016.
Joe, I do think some of that.
We'll see what happens over the next 5 months. But David Leonhardt, I'll give you another quote from the other David's article here, which is fascinating because we're talking about Democrats. How can they survive a possible impeachment inquiry? David Drucker also reports in Vanity Fair, some Republicans just can't take it anymore. They're just exhausted, and they're voting with their feet. Nearly 20 Republicans in the House of Representatives are calling it quits rather than re-election next year. And here's the money line. Representative Susan Brooks of Indiana, in charge of candidate recruitment for the party's House campaign arm, is among those running for the exits.
Bye.
David.
Yeah. Look, I think that's absolutely part of the reason why we see some Republicans leaving, and I think it's honorable for them to leave rather than to continue defending him. I think some of this Republican stuff about socialism is rationalization. I mean, Hillary Clinton is not a socialist, and yet at the end of the day, the entire party lined up behind Donald Trump in 2016, right? And so I think to some extent, a lot of the Republicans in the party, I admire the ones who are quitting. I'm glad they are. I wish they'd also speak up. But I think some of the ones who are staying are always going to find an excuse for why they're supporting Trump. In 2016, they made it about Hillary Clinton personally. This time, they'll claim socialism. But I think at the end of the day, they're essentially willing to follow Trump because he's popular with the base. And a lot of the other stuff ends up being excuses.
Well, those are the members, the rank and file members, though, I can tell you, given a choice between having their health care taken away, which is what many of them believe Medicare for all would do, because that's what Bernie Sanders says. That's what it would do, taking away private health care insurance. What we saw in the first debate, David, where you actually had the talk about decriminalization of illegal border crossings, health care benefits for illegal immigrants. That actually is not rationalization on a lot of conservatives' part. A lot of them just believe, I hate Donald Trump, but I can't vote for that.
Oh, look, I mean, Joe, I've written a column saying Democrats stop helping Trump. I completely agree with you that border decriminalization and what I call mandatory Medicare are really bad mistakes on the Democrats' part. I'm just saying if it weren't that, I think Republicans would find another reason, many of them, to line up behind Trump, because we saw them do that in 2016.
Well, and David Drucker, the interesting thing is that's why the president is going after Joe Biden. He sees Joe Biden as the real threat here. Probably more so than Elizabeth Warren, and that is why he's trying to create a Benghazi-like environment around Joe Biden, and doing it in a way that is such an affront to the Constitution and to the values that Republican senators used to wax on about back in the day. In your reporting for this piece, did you find any Republican senators that you believe could be the person? I keep thinking of Lamar Alexander. He's not running again. He's an honorable guy. He's smart. He knows how bad this is. Will any of them find that moment, that Mr. Smith goes to Washington moment, where they stand up and says the emperor wears no clothes?
Well, look, there's always a chance, Senator, but I think, for a lot of Republicans, they're looking at the Senate majority and they're realizing that if Trump goes down that bad, they're in a lot of deep trouble. Now, I will tell you that I spoke to a Republican senator on Monday, somebody who was not inclined to get into public fights with Trump and doesn't necessarily have an issue with Trumpism per se, who, conceded to me this could be a real serious issue if it pans out the way Democrats are saying. And I want to find out, and we need to find out. I think the danger for Democrats is they're moving ahead along a storyline that hasn't necessarily panned out at its worst yet, but they're sort of assuming that that's where it's going to end up. And as we learned with the Russia investigation, things can look really bad. The president can act very unseemly. You can get a special counsel report that is very damaging, and yet there was a ton of smoke, but never quite that smoking gun that was able to communicate to voters across the political spectrum, this is a bad guy that needs to go. And if Republicans don't see something like that, they're going to hold their cards close to their vest and keep on going the way they have.
All right, David Drucker's piece is for Vanity Fair, and David Leonhardt's column is in the New York Times. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Both of you, both David. Still ahead, the Ukraine scandal brings us to a critical point in the battle between the president and House Democrats, with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi expected to discuss impeachment in a meeting with her caucus today. We'll have that, plus the new reporting overnight that helped get us to this stage.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.